Morning. Good morning.
Shavua Tov. We're learning the halachas. Some of the halachas we learned as we learned Maseches Tamid. We stopped in Perek Daled after Mishnah Aleph so that we can review the halachas and the order of the avoda. And we're in Bahasheves Avoda, page 73. We learned about the first pious, the first lottery, and the winner of the first lottery did Trumas Hadeshen, and that was done every day. And now we're learning about Hotzos Hadeshen. Hotzos Hadeshen would be the removal of the ash that gathered on the Mizbeach, the middle of the Mizbeach, the Tapuach, which you can see if you go to page 75, which Blineda will get to today. You can see in the middle of the Mizbeach, there is what they form into looks like an apple, a tapuach of ash. The winner of the first lottery took off a shovel of ash, not from the tapuach, he took off a shovel of ash from the ma'aracha. The ma'aracha burned yesterday. If you take a look at page 69, you can see the Kohen taking off a bit of ash from the ma'aracha, not from the tapuach. The ma'aracha that burned yesterday, the korbanos, today that ma'aracha has to be cleaned up so a new ma'aracha can be placed there for today's korbanos. The winner of lottery number 1 before dawn this morning took a shovel off of that ash of the ma'aracha, and he put it on the eastern side of the ram in the Beis Hadeshen. Hotzos Hadeshen is every day the top of the Mizbeach would be cleaned off, and the ash would be put in the center of the Mizbeach. And as necessary, that tapuach would be cleaned off the Mizbeach. The tapuach would not be cleaned, we learned, on the Shalosh Regalim, so that when the Bnei Yisrael were Oila Regel, they can see how much ash there was in the top of the Mizbeach, and that the Mishnah taught us was a beautiful thing for the Mizbeach, so that people can see how many korbanos were brought, and how the Beis HaMikdash was being used by Bnei Yisrael. And that was a beautiful sight for the Beis HaMikdash and the Mizbeach, so they didn't clean off the tapuach during the Shalosh Regalim. They did clean off the tapuach as necessary when it got too big, and this was done, as you can see in page 72. We took a look at that last week, picture 52a with a fasachter. A fasachter is a huge vessel. They shoveled the ash into this vessel. 2 kohanim, one at the top of the ram, one at the bottom of the ram, would schlep down this psachter. And then we would start the process of emptying the psachter and taking out that deshen. That's called Hotzos Hadeshen. That's what we're going to learn about today. There's 2 mitzvahs. Trumas Hadeshen, win a lottery 1 every day before dawn. Hotzos Hadeshen as necessary when the tapuach in the middle of the Mizbeach was full. That is according to Rashi. According to the Rambam and Ravid, Hotzos Hadeshen, that second mitzvah, was also done every day. We're going to learn like Rashi, it was only done as necessary. So on page 73, the Hasheves Havodah says as follows: Achar shehoridu es hadeshen me'mizbeach loretz, after they took the ash from the Mizbeach down with the psachter, picture 52a, kol mi sheyirtze me'akohanim shel oseh beis av, any Kohen who was from today's Beis Av, Kohanim again, came every 24 weeks as a mishmar, and the mishmar was broken down into 6 days. So today was a Beis Av, Monday was a Beis Av, Tuesday was a Beis Av, etc. So anyone who wanted to now empty the fasachter, this huge vessel that has all this ash on it, once it got down off the ram, Kohanim were allowed to go over to the psachter. Bo umamali es hadeshen b'kli. The Kohen, each Kohen would come and take out ash and put it into a vessel. You take it out of the Azorah, out of the Beis Hamikdash, out of Yerushalayim, and outside the city of Yerushalayim there was a place called the Makom Tahar. It was a place that was kept ritually pure, so it wasn't a cemetery, it wasn't a place where stones from a house that had a tzaras would be put there. It was a Makom Tahar. And that's where each Kohen who took some ash out of the Psach would put the ash. Vav, page 73. Manichin es hadeshem v'mokim she'en aruchos menash v'shom v'chazaka v'lo zrome yayim mitzuyim shom k'dei shlo yifaz v'oso mishom. The ash from the Psach from the Tapuach into Psach was taken to a place where it wasn't very windy outside Yerushalayim, nor was there water running directly there, so that to make sure that the ash would not disperse or get mixed into water. As we'll see in Halakha Yud Aleph, although there was no me'ilah, there was no avera me'ilah on this ash. We explained last week. The Gemara tells us in Tamura, Ein lecha dov shenasis mitzvah yomay alam boy. There is no such case where a mitzvah is finished and the kedusha still remains in the mitzvah, in the sense that there's a din me'ilah. We're not talking about now tashmishe kedusha, tashmishe mitzvah, which is a separate sugya in Megillah. We're not talking now about tefillin boxes that you're not going to use anymore, or tefillin parchment you're not going to use anymore, or tzitzis you're not going to use anymore. We're not talking about that. We're talking now about the din of me'ilah, misusing hektish. So once mitzvah seinasis, once the mitzvah has been completed, there is no longer a din me'ilah, the din of misuse of hektish, because the hektish was already accomplished. Nevertheless, even though this is a korban that's been consumed, and this is ash that from a korban that's been consumed, so the mitzvah's been done. Nevertheless, even though there's no din me'ilah, it should still not be improperly used by anybody for any purpose, and we still make sure to put it in a place where it won't blow around everywhere or won't mix with water. Zayin, b'shor shemotzias hadeshen lo beish bigdei kahuna pechusim v'lo bigdei kahuna regilim. When a Kohen is going to do the mitzvah of Hotzos Hadeshen, he's going to take the some of the ash outside the Beis Hamikdash, outside the Yerushalayim. He puts on bigdei kahuna that are less expensive, less fine than his normal 4 bigdei kahuna. We talked about this at the Trumas Hadeshen. The Kohen who won lottery 1 and did the Trumas Hadeshen, according to Rashi, he wore his regular 4 bigdei kahuna. According to the Rambam, the winner of lottery 1 did not wear his regular 4 bigdei kahuna. He wore a less expensive set of bigdei kahuna. And then if he wanted to do other avoda, he would put on his better 4 bigdei kahuna. Why? Because we have this rule that keli shebishol l'rabbi layimza kais l'rabbi. The clothing that a servant wears when he's working in the kitchen cooking a meal for his king, when he actually is going to leave the room, the kitchen, and he's going to go and serve the wine to a king, you take off the apron, you put on the butler's little vest. You don't walk out of the kitchen in your dirty clothing that got dirty from cooking in the kitchen and you start serving the meal to the king. So you change your clothing from the kitchen to when you're going to serve the king. By the same token, a Kohen that's doing the Hotzos Hadesh, and he's taking the ash out of the Beis Hamikdash, Yerushalayim, and his begodim may get dirty from the ash. That's inappropriate to wear those clothing to go back into the Beis Hamikdash and do other avodah. So the Kohen who is going to do Hotzos Hadeshen, everyone holds. If you're going to do a Hotzos Hadeshen, remove the ash that's in that big psach there on picture 52 Aleph. And you're going to take the ash out of the Beis Hamikdash, out of the Yerushalayim. You use lower level Big Day Kahuna. When you come back to the Beis Hamikdash, you put on your regular Big Day Kahuna if you're going to do other avoda. That's for Hotza'os Hadeshin. Everyone agrees to that. There's a Machlokas, Rashi, and Rambam. If a Trumas Hadeshin, the winner of the lottery, who took off only a shovelful of ash every day before dawn, whether he needed to use a lesser form of Big Day Kahuna. Rashi says no, he can use his regular Big Day Kahuna, and the Rambam says that there too, winner of lottery one should use a lesser form of clothing because after all, he's going to be working with ash. So the Rambam says Rambam holds for Trumas Hadeshin and for Hotza'os Hadeshin, the Kohen uses a lesser form of the 4 Big Day Kahuna. And Rashi says for Trumas Hadeshin, he uses his regular Big Day Kahuna, and for Hotza'os Hadeshin, he would use a lesser level Big Day Kahuna. Ches. Avoda zu shel Hotza'os Hadeshin me'hamizbeach. This avoda of taking of Hotza'os Hadeshin, lo nasis b'chol yom v'yom. It was not done every day. This is Rashi Shita. Elarak bisman shenisraba hadeshin shenishal gab mizbeach. It was only done at times where it was decided that tapuach is too big and it needs to be cleaned off, but not every day. If you take a look at footnote 9, you'll see that's Rashi Shita. The Rambam and the Ravid disagree with that. In fact, there's a difference of opinion as to what the opinion of the Rambam is. But the Rashi's opinion is Hotza'os Hadeshin is done only as necessary. The Rambam Ravid hold it's done every day. Halacha tes. Nechlaku harishonim imotziin es kol hadeshim sheva mizbeach v'lohoy mashirim bo klum o shemotziim rak es rubo avo mashirim menum atz machlok rishonim. When Hotza'os Hadeshin was done, did they clear the whole tapuach, or did they leave a little ash in the middle of the mizbeach from the tapuach? That's a machlok rishonim that depends on a certain concept about Hotza'os Hadeshin. We're going to skip Yud because that again deals, as we saw last week, different halachas about Kodshei Kadoshim and Kodshei Kalim, different levels of karbonis. Yud Aleph, Bedeshin shows Tzio L'chutz Ein Bo Din Me'ila. The Hotza'os Hadeshin, after they took the ash outside the city of Yerushalayim, there's no Din Me'ila. So if somebody went over to the ash and he took the ash and he used it for his own personal reasons, he would not be chayiv in din me'ila. A person, chas v'shalom, misuses hektish, he has to bring a korban me'ila. There are all kinds of halachas when you misuse hektish. Something that's hektish and you use it for your own personal benefit is called me'ila. But as we mentioned earlier, once it's nasis mitzvosoi, ein boy me'ila. Once the mitzvah is finished with it, there's no me'ila. Me'ila means don't misuse hektish for your personal needs. Once the mitzvah is completed, the hektish is done, and you can't misuse it. It's not hektish. So there's no din me'ila on the ash of the Hotza'os Hadeshin. Mishum shekvar nasas necessar mitzvah. So the mitzvah has already been done. So the din me'ila is not there. Ach mikol mokum also lahanas bimenu. Nevertheless, a person is not allowed to use it for his own personal needs, and that we learn out of a pasuk. And if you do use it for your own personal needs, you violated the halacha, but you're not chayiv of din me'ila. Page 74. Page 74 has the psukim from Parshas Tzav, which are the psukim for the mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshin and Hotza'os Hadeshin. Let's take a look quickly at the psukim. Vayidabra Hashem al Moshe Lemar, Tzav es Aaron ves bonav Lemar, Zos Torah ha'ola hi ha'ola al mokdal mizbeach kol halayla ad haboker ve'esh ha'mizbeach tukadlo. This is the law. Hashem said to Moshe, tell Aaron and his sons, this is the law of the korban ola. We're talking now about the korban Tamid. The ola shall be on fire on the mizbeach the whole night until morning, and the fire of the mizbeach shall consume it the whole night. V'lovash hakoyim midai bad or mipnasei bad yubash es al basaroi v'heirim es hadeshin. That's the mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshin. The Kohen should put on his big day kahuna, and he should do the Trumas Hadeshin. Asher tochal ha'esh ha'sa'ola ala mizbeach which the fire consumed the Ola on the Mizbeach. What do you do with the ash now? V'somo eitz al HaMizbeach. The Kohen should put this ash of Trumas Hadeshin right next to the Mizbeach. This is the mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshin. Shovel off the top of the Mizbeach from the ash of the carbon Ola of yesterday, and you put it on the eastern side of the ramp next to the Mizbeach. Upashat es begodav. Now the Kohen should take off his big day kahuna, v'lovash begodim achever, and he should put on other clothing, meaning he should put on other big day kahuna. This is where the change of clothing comes in. The Kohen did the Trumas Hadeshin in the pasuk we just read in his regular big day kahuna, as Rashi tells us. And when a Kohen wants to do Hotza'as Hadeshin, he has to change out of those expensive 4 begodim and put on a lesser quality set of begodim, v'lovash begodim acherim, v'hotzi'as Hadeshin el michutz lamachane el mokom tohar. And he should now do the mitzvah of Hotza'as Hadeshin. We're on page 74 of Bahasheves Avoda. Now look at the word, v'hotzi'as Hadeshin. This is the mitzvah of Hotza'as Hadeshin, el michutz lamachane, outside of Yerushalayim, el mokom tahar, to a pure place. Now, of course, when these psukim were said, this was in the midbar. Chutz lamachane means outside Machane Yisrael. We went through the laws of the 3 Machanos. The city of Yerushalayim is Machane Yisrael, until the wall of the Har Habayis. The wall of the Har Habayis until the wall of the Azorah is the Machane Leviyah, and inside the wall of the Azorah is Machane Shechina. So the pasuk says you take out the deshen el michutz lamachane, outside Machane Yisrael, and when you come to Eretz Yisrael, Machane Yisrael is the city of Yerushalayim. Therefore, you remove the ash outside the city of Yerushalayim. So if you take a look at the 2 psukim, one pasuk says v'heirim es hadeshen, that's Trumas Hadeshin, and it says v'samo eitzel hamizbeach. You should put that ash next to the mizbeach. That is Trumas Hadeshin, a shovel of ash off the mizbeach, eastern side of the ramp of the mizbeach. The next pasuk is talking about changing the clothing into a lesser form of big day kahuna. V'hotzi'as hadeshin el michutz lamachane. That's hotza'as hadeshin, and there you take it outside Yerushalayim el mokom tahor. V'eish al mizbeach tukad bolo sichper uvier oleh hakohen eitzim baboker. In the morning, the Kohen should set up the eitzim. The word, that's the maracha, and that's the halachas that we're up to now. V'orach aleh ha'ola, v'hikter aleh chelvei hashlamim. You put the ola on the maracha, and you burn on the maracha the fats of all karbonis, shlomim. Eish tamid tukal al mizbech lo sichbeh. There shall always be a fire lit on the mizbech, and it shall not be extinguished. Page 75. Siddur HaMarachos. So we just read the psukim that tell us about Trumas Hadeshin, and that ash is put, that shovel of ash is put on the eastern side of the ramp of the Mizbeach. The mitzvah of Hotza'as Hadeshin is to take it chutz lamachane, outside Yerushalayim. Where are we up to right now? The Kohanim came to the Beis Hamikdash yesterday. They slept in the Beis Hamoked last night. They woke up this morning, the new Mishmar. The Beis Av for today were woken up by the Mamuna Gabini Cruz. He announced, shouted out, everybody wake up. He went into the Beis Hamoked. He did the pious there. Winner number 1 did the Trumas Hadeshin. He left the Beis Hamoked through the small pishpash, the small door in the southern end of the Beis Hamoked. He went to the kiyar. He used the pulley system to lift up the kiyar. He washed his hands and his feet. He did the mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshin. Kohanim followed him out from the Beis Hamoked. Some went to the east, some went to the west, and they did the Bilush HaAzorah with torches. They checked to make sure the Azara had all the kalim in their proper places. And then Kohanim would begin the process of the Ma'arachos, bringing new wood to the top of the Mizbeach. We already learned that after the Kohen winner lottery winner number one, he took that shovel off of the top of the Mizbeach. Other Kohanim went to the top of the Mizbeach with pitchforks and little shovels. Any meat, any limbs of an animal that were still on the Ma'aracha and not consumed, they took off the Ma'aracha and put on the open areas of the Mizbeach or the top part of the ram. This way the top part of the Mizbeach was now ready to be cleaned so that he can put new wood on it. And that's where we're up to. The top of the Mizbeach, they've removed yesterday's, they cleaned off yesterday's ash. Where did they put yesterday's ash? In the middle of the Mizbeach on the Tapuach. Siddur HaMaracha is page 75. Sholosh HaMaracha. Sholosh Maracha shel Eitzim hayu masat al gab Mizbeach b'chol yoyim. Every day they would set up on top of the Mizbeach 3 Marachos, 3 sets of logs. Ha'achas nikras Maracha Gedola. One is called the Big Maracha. You can see the Maracha Gedola there. It's on the southeastern side of the Mizbeach. Ashniya Nikras Maracha Shel Ketores. The second is the Maracha of Ketores. That's on the southwest side of the Mizbeach. Va'od Maracha Shlishis, and the third Maracha you can see is on the northern side in the middle of the Mizbeach, and that's called the Maracha of Kiyum Ha'esh, just to make sure there's a fire going on the Mizbeach. The Maracha Shniya Shel Ketores, the Maracha Gedola was used in order to consume the animals of Karbonis on that Maracha. The Maracha Shniya Shel Ketores was made simply to create coals. Once those logs burned and made coals, the coals would be brought in, going to Midos diagram 3. You have the Maracha HaKetores in your diagram. You have the word right there, Maracha Ketores. It is southwest. The coals would be taken off, brought up the steps of the Ulam, into the Heichal, and would be put on the Mizbeach HaKetores, and then the Ketores Avoda would begin. Obviously, we're only talking about now setting up the wood on the Mizbeach. We're not talking about, we haven't gotten yet to igniting the fire, nor have we gotten to entering the Heichal. We learned about it already, Maseches Tamid, but we've not done it yet in V'chashev Avoda, in which we're going in order. Page 76. V'chach Mesadrin Oisam, and this is how you organize the logs. Maracha Gedola, the big Maracha, southeast on the Mizbeach, which is where you're going to consume the Karbonis. Acha Shehelu Asadesh Al Gabe Tapur Keniskal El. After the top of the Mizbeach was cleaned by taking the ash and putting it on the Tapuach, Ve'echinu es Mokam HaMaracha. The Mokam HaMaracha, where you're going to put the southeast corner of the Mizbeach, is now clean. You took off the ash from yesterday and you put it on the Tapuach. Now that southeastern corner is ready for a new set of logs. Mavi'in gezirei eitzim milishkas ha'eitzim. You bring logs of wood from the lishkas ha'eitzim, picture 54 and 54a, umal and oisam l'mizbeach, and you bring them to the Mizbeach. If we go back to our Midos 3, the Ezras Noshim, each corner of the Ezras Noshim had a chamber. The chamber that was on the northeastern side of the Ezras Noshim is called Lishkas Ha'etzim. It was in this room that Kohanim who were Balei Mumim, we learned about this in Masech Midos. Kohanim who were Balei Mumin, they could not do what the Avodah. They're Kohanim that have a mum, physical blemishes by which the Torah says they can't do Avodah. But those Kohanim would be in the Lishkas Ha'etzim, and they would check the wood that was brought into here, into the Lishkas Ha'etzim. to make sure that there were no worms in the wood. We learned about those halachas in Masech Tamidos. So in Lishkas Ha'etzim, the wood was inspected. Once it was inspected and it was found to be wood that can be used for the Mizbeach, excuse me, so then it would be brought. Now, how it would be brought is a question, but they would get the eitzim out of the wood that's been found to be kosher for the Mizbeach. They would take it out of the Lishkas Ha'etzim. Now, this is north on your diagram 3. They would take it out of the Lishkas Ha'etzim, walk it through the Chayil across the whole northern side, make a turn, go up the western side, make a turn, come up the southern side, and they would deposit this wood, let's see where it is, right there in the Shar HaDelek. Delek means to ignite. So the wood would be inspected in the Lishkas Ha'etzim and then brought all the way to the Shar HaDelek. And when they needed wood for the Mizbeach, it would be taken out of the Shar HaDelek and brought to the Mizbeach. Who brings these logs to the Mizbeach? Kohanim who volunteered. This was not part of the pious. It was not part of the lottery system. You can take a look at picture 55. Well, 54 shows you a picture of the Lishkas Ha'etzim. That was in the northeast corner of the Ezras Noshim that we just looked at. And there were piles of logs that had been inspected. Eventually, the logs get moved to the Lishkas, the Shar HaDelek, and they're brought through the Shar HaDelek to the Mizbeach. If you take a look at picture 55, we have volunteer Kohanim bringing the logs to the top of the Mizbeach, and they just brought the logs to the top of the Mizbeach. Who set up the logs? That was our winner of lottery number 1. We said he had numerous privileges that were given to him. He had the privilege of doing the Trumas Hadeshin, setting up the logs on the Maracha Gidola, setting up the logs on the Maracha Shel Ketores, igniting the 2 Marachos, and then he would finally have the privilege of putting the 2 extra pieces of wood, the separate mitzvah of Shnei Gezirei Eitzim, to put on the Mizbeach, which we'll see in a few moments. We're in Beis on page 76. Umisha Zocha Litrom Es Hadeshin, the person that won the lottery and did Trumas Hadeshin, Hu Haya Mesadres Atze Hamarocha Hagdola Shel HaKarbonis, the Mizrocha Shel HaMizbeach Tzomud L'Tapua. He got the privilege to actually set up the logs on the the southeast corner of the Mizbeach, and some of the wood would touch the Tapua in the middle of the Mizbeach. Gimel, Mesader Ha'etzim al HaMizbeach, he sets up the wood, the logs on the Mizbeach. Ubetzad Mizrach Ha'yamasher Kimin Chalom Patuach, on the eastern side of the logs, he would leave a little window. We learned this when we learned Masech Tamid. It's picture 56. You can see the logs are set up like Lincoln logs, going in different directions. And that was in order to create space between the logs. The spaces between the logs would be used in order to ignite the logs and also for air, oxygen to get into between the logs. But specifically, they would leave a gap on the eastern side of the wood, which you can see in 56. That gap was specifically made so that air can get in there freely and help the fire ignite. The reason they did it on the eastern side is because the eastern side faced Shar Nicanor. Shar Nicanor faced the Shar Ezras Noshim. So this was really the opening to the Beis HaMikdash. If you go to diagram 3, the eastern side of the Mizbeach is facing Shar Nicanor, facing the opening of the Ezras Noshim. So wind would blow in through this eastern gate, through the Shar Nicanor, to the eastern side of the Mizbeach. The eastern side of the logs had the window, and the wind would go into the window. Oxygen would get into the window and help ignite the fire. Back to page 76. Shemisham haruach hoysam and asheres. The wind blew from there. V'chein misham hayamadlikas ha'esh. That's where he would initially ignite the fire at that window. V'chein haya'osa revach bein hagezirim. He would also leave space between the logs. Kidei sheyuchal lahadlikas ha'esh beineim, so that he would be able to put additional small torches in between these logs to ignite the fire. Dalet, ein shir legogel hamarocha. There's no specific measurement to how big the marocha gedola had to be. Ela osa kviat tzorach sheyitztarch lekarbonos. He made it the size that would be needed for karbonos ba'osa yom that day. So, for example, if it was Shabbos, and on a regular day, you have the korban tamid in the morning, the korban tamid in the afternoon, then you have private people bringing karbonos that they need for that day. Usually you would not know how many Jews would show up that day, but they had an idea of how much wood they needed for the Maracha Gedola. On Shabbos, they would know right away they needed more wood because Shabbos korban musaf. Yom Tov, they would need more. Yom Kippur, more, etc. So they had an idea each morning how much wood they would need for the Maracha Gedola based upon how many karbonos would be brought that day. But in terms of a shear, an exact measurement, there was no halachic shear for the Maracha Gedola. Page 78. Maracha Shniya, the second Maracha, which is the Maracha of Ketoras. After he sets up the big Maracha, Borer Atse Te'ena Yafin. They select from the stock of wood they have very fine wood that comes from a fig tree, a te'ena. Why fig? So let's go back to the Mishnah we learned in Tamid. For the Maracha Gedola, the truth of the matter is the Maracha Gedola, the Maracha Ketores, any wood is kosher for the Maracha and the Mizbeach, any wood whatsoever. But the Mishnah says they did not use wood that came from an olive tree, nor would they use wood that came from a vine, a vineyard. Why? So the Yerushalmi says one reason is Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. They wanted to make sure that vines, vineyards were not destroyed. They wanted to make sure that olive trees were not destroyed because of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And therefore they said, even though it's for the tzorech of the Beis Hamikdash, and it's for the use of karbonos, nevertheless, we don't want you cutting down olive trees and we don't want you cutting down vineyards to make wood for the Mizbeach. So they did not use that. All other wood was kosher. The Mishnah, remember, told us that there were three specific types of wood that they would use. One was Atse egos. One was Atse, we don't know exactly what that egos was. One was Atse shemen. Also, we're not sure what kind of wood that was. It came from a tree. It's called an oil tree. And they did use Atse te'ena that were from te'enim trees, fig trees that weren't growing well. When that's for the Maracha Gedola. Maracha Gedola, you can use any wood, but not wood from a vineyard, not wood from an olive tree. They used those three trees, egos, shemen, and te'ena. When it came to the Maracha Shel Ketores, they specifically used wood that came from a fig tree, a te'ena. Why? We'll see in a minute. We learned it when we learned Maseches Tamid. We'll see it again in the footnote here. You set up the logs for the Marocha of Ketores. You're going, this Marocha, the Marocha Gedola is fire to consume karbonos. The Marocha of Ketores has no purpose other than to create a fire from which coals will be made. The coals will then be taken into the heichel so that and put on the Mizbeach HaKetores so that you can put Ketores on it. This Marocha of Ketores was put on the southwestern side of the Mizbeach. Marocha Gedola to consume animals is southeast of the Mizbeach. The Marocha of Ketores is southwest. And they drew it towards the north of the Mizbeach 4 amos. So it wasn't exactly at the southwestern corner. It was towards the southwestern corner, but moved 4 amos towards the north. Take a look at footnote number 6, why they wanted to use wood that came from a fig tree to create coals for Ketores. ומה שבמערוך השנייה העדיפו עצי תאנה הוא משום שבעלי תאנה היסה תקונה לאדם הראשון. They used the te'ena tree to create coals, to put on the Mizbeach HaKetores, to consume Ketores, because the te'ena tree began the process of a tikkun for Adam Harishon for his chet, after Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. Vayedu ki erumim hein. The pasuk says they realized that they were naked. Vayispru ale se'ena. They took leaves from a fig tree and they made some kind of garment to cover themselves up. That's where they started their tikkun with ale tehena. Now, what was one of the averis that was involved in the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra? One of the averis that Adam and Chava did was that they were makabel lashon hara. The Nachash spoke lashon hara about God, and they were makabel the lashon hara about God. And they ate from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. So part of the aveir of Adam and Chava, the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, was the aveir of lashon hara. Lachein, the footnote continues. The Ketores shemachaperes aloshin hara mavian atzei te'ena. One of the things that Ketores accomplished in the Beis Hamikdash was it was a partial kapara, atonement for those Jews who did the sin of lashon hara. The Gemara explains why. So Adam and Chava began their tikkun for the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra with leaves from a fig tree. And part of their Aveira was lashon hara. And Ketores is machaper on lashon hara. So to create the coals to burn the Ketores, they used wood from a fig tree. This is Rashi, quote from Rashi in Zvachim and Daf Nun Ches Amid Aleph. Halacha Vav, Kamos ha'etzim shemesadim b'ma'aracha. The amount of wood, the amount of logs that they would put on the Maracha of Ketores, he b'shir kazeh sheyetze me'etzem elu chomesh se'in gecholim. This is different than the Maracha Gedola. We learned on the page before the Maracha Gedola, the logs that were assembled and used to consume animals. There was no exact measurement to how many logs or how much you needed to bring for the Maracha Gedola. The Kohanim would estimate how much they need based upon what day it was. Was it a regular day, Shabbos, Yom Tov, Yom Kippur, etc. More karbonos needs more wood. The Maracha of Ketores did have a measurement. How much wood did you have to bring? So Halacha Vav tells us, Kemos ha'etzim shemesadvim b'maracha zu, the amount of wood that you put on the Maracha, he b'shir kazeh sheyetzim e'etzim elu chomesh se'in gecholim. It was enough wood that would create, after it was kindled, 5 se'in of coal. It's a measurement. A saw is a certain measurement. 5 se'in of coal had to be given off by these logs, and therefore they knew how many logs were needed for the Maracha Shel Ketores. And that's for a regular day of the week. You have to bring enough logs to create 5 se'in of gecholim. U'b'Shabbos shir shmona se'in gecholim. However, on Shabbos, you will have to bring additional logs, because on Shabbos you have to have enough logs to create 8 se'in of coal. Why? Because you need more fire on Shabbos at the Atzei Maracha. Mipnei she'oleh makirim b'chol Shabbos shnei bazichei levona she'lechem aponim. On Shabbos, on the shulchan, the lechem aponim, The whole week there was lechem upon him in the shulchan. Your Midas diagram 3. You can see against the southern wall of your heichal, you see the shulchan. The shulchan has 12 breads on it, 6 on each row. There's a table, and then there are 5 shelves. There's a challah on the table, and then there's a challah on each of the 5 shelves, so that there are 6 challahs, and then opposite those, there are another 6 challahs. There are 12 challahs. Those challahs were taken off the lechem aponim were taken off every Shabbos afternoon and divided amongst the Kohanim. And the new lechem haponim was put on the shulchan and stayed there for the following week. And the bread was 9 days old. It was baked on Friday. It was put on the shulchan on Shabbos and wasn't eaten till the following Shabbos. The shulchan, besides having 2 sets of 6 breads, also on the table itself. The shulchan is a table, but then on the table there are 5 shelves on each side. And each side has a challah on the table, a challah on each shelf, so you have 12 challahs. On the table there were also 2 cups, and in the cup there was ketoris. It's called Shnei or Lavona, Shnei Bazich and Lavona, 2 cups of Lavona, and that stayed there the whole week until Shabbos afternoon when the lechem aponim was removed from the table. These 2 cups of Lavona were brought to the outside Mizbeach and were burnt on the outside Mizbeach on the Maracha Shel Ketoris. So on Shabbos, not only would the Maracha Shel Ketoris need to create enough coal to burn the Ketoris in the Heichal, there had to remain some coal on the outside in order to bring out the Bazichim and burn the Lavona there. So we have 2-way traffic going here on Shabbos. The chalos are on the shulchan of the lechem aponim. Those chalos are going to be removed and eaten by Kohanim. New chalos are going to be put on the table. At the same time, there are 2 bazichim of Lavona that are on this table. They are going to be taken out of the heichal, brought to the Mizbeach, and burnt on the Maracha Shel Ketoris right here. And then earlier in the day, coals were taken from the Maracha Shel Ketoris, brought into the heichal, put on the Mizbeach, and Ketoris was burned. So this Maracha Shel Ketoris had 2 purposes on Shabbos. It created coals to take into the heichal to put on the Mizbeach, and some coals had to remain on the Maracha of Ketoris so that the Baziche Lavona can be brought out and burnt in the afternoon on those coals. So on Shabbos, you needed more coals on the Maracha Shel Ketoris. So on Shabbos, it had to be enough logs to create 8 se'in of coals. Okay, so what does the top of our Mizbeach look like? Let's go back 1 page, 2 pages. Let's take a look at page 75. Our winner of lottery 1 has been to the top of the Mizbeach and took a little ash off. Done. Kohanim went to the top of the Mizbeach and by pitchfork took off the limbs that hadn't been consumed, and they put it around the top of the Mizbeach or on the ram, the top part of the ram. They cleaned off any ash that was on the top of the Mizbeach and they put it in the middle of the Mizbeach, the Tapuach. Now the southwest corner and the southeast corner of the Mizbeach are clean and they're ready for new logs. The Kohanim brought up logs and put it on the southeastern side of the Mizbeach. The winner of lottery 1 would set them up and leave that window on the eastern side of the logs. Our winner number 1 would then set up logs on the southwestern side of the Mizbeach. So now the marachos are ready. What's the next thing we're going to do? Page 79. Page 78, halacha, very important halacha. Zayin hachzoras ha'ivorim. Now that the 2 new sets of logs are set up, Machzirin es ha'evorim v'ha'abdorim shlonis aklu ba'erev. We're now going to take all those limbs and fats that were put in the middle of the mizbeach or on the ram because they hadn't been fully consumed yesterday, and they were taken off the marocha and put in the center or on the ram so that the mizbeach can be cleaned up. And now it got cleaned up, and now we have two new marochos. So now we're going to take those fats and limbs that hadn't been consumed yesterday, and we're going to put them now on the new marocha gedola. Now you're going to put it on that big marocha where you consume karbonos. So these fats and limbs that hadn't been consumed, they weren't finished being consumed yesterday, they were pushed to the side, to the middle of the mizbeach or to the ramp. They cleaned the mizbeach, a new marocha, and now on the marocha gedola, they're going to take those fats and limbs and put them on the marocha gedola. There's no fire yet. Now we're up to page 79. Page 79. Even though the fire that was on the top of the mizbeach by miracle came down from heaven, nevertheless, there's a separate mitzvah from the Torah that a Kohen bring physically, a human being bring fire to the mizbeach. You can see that in picture 60. It has to be a fire that was not used by a commoner. In other words, this is eish that wasn't used for any other purpose. Where did you get this from? Mi beis hanitzutz. In our beis hanitzutz, the northern wall of the Azorah, the beis hanitzutz, the spark room where they kept a small fire. The fire was brought from there to the mizbeach. Others say it came from the Beis Hamoke, which also had a large fire in the middle. That's where the Kohanim warmed themselves up if they got cold. Both of these rooms had fires, different shitas. Some say the fire was brought from the Beis Hanitzutz to the Mizbeach. Some say it was brought from the Beis Hamoke to the Mizbeach. But anyway, that's where they got the fire. Umadlik bo es ha'ma'arachov. And our Kohen who won the first lottery gets to kindle the Marocha Gedola and the Marocha Shel Ketores. Now that it's kindled, and remember, we have already put the fats and the limbs of karbonos that weren't consumed yesterday, we have already put it in the Marocha Gedola. And now he's kindled the Marocha Gedola and the Marocha Shel Ketores. And those fats and limbs of yesterday are again being consumed on the Marocha Gedola. The carbon Tamid of today has not been shechted yet. We're not up to there yet. What's on the Marocha Gedola are the fats and limbs from yesterday's carbon that weren't fully consumed. The Kohen has now ignited the fire. Our winner of Lottery 1 is going to do the next thing, halacha test. After the winner of Lottery 1 kindled the two Marochos, Chose v'nosein shnei gezire eitzim al gabe hamarocha gedol. You can see that in picture 61. Our winner of Lottery 1, the Marocha, is now burning. He's going to take two small pieces of wood, shnei gezire eitzim, separate mitzvah in the Torah, and he's going to throw it on top of the already lit Marocha Gedola. Ugezirim elu hayakol echem mehem barach ama arochav ama. These two pieces of wood did have a shear, an amma wide, an amma long. Va'uvav kamachet godesh sa'a. Mikol makom emidazu makevas. The exact measurements are not absolute, and if it was smaller or bigger, you still yotz the mitzvah, but that's the mitzvah. So it's an amma wide, an amma long, and the thickness of each of these, what looks like boards, is machat godesh sa'ah. Was a certain measurement. A person went into a store and he wanted, let's call it a kilo of flour. So they had a vessel, standard vessel, a kilo vessel. If somebody came into the store and said, I want a half a kilo of flour, they had a half a kilo vessel. So a person comes into the store and he says, I want a kilo of flour. Okay, so you fill up the vessel and you have a kilo. These are like pre-measured vessels. You put the flour in there. Now, Torah is very makbid. We know we have rules about scales have to be exact. The mishkol, the weight has to be exact. So there has to be a sa'ah of flour in this vessel. We don't want more, because if there's more in there, then the seller will be cheated. Right? There's a sa'ah of flour costs 20 shekel. Here's the flour. It's measured in the vessel. Put it into a bag. The buyer takes it home. He gives the 20 shekel. So if it's an exact sa'ah, everybody's happy. Exact sa'ah for 20 shekel. If the vessel's not fully full, then the buyer got cheated. He paid 20 shekel. He didn't get a full sa'ah. If the vessel has more in it than a sa'ah, then the seller got cheated. How can it have more? You have a vessel. You fill up the flour. We know that you can fill up flour above the top. It's harder to do with liquids because liquids will flow over the sides. But when you're dealing with flour, you can take a vessel, fill up the vessel, and above the top of the vessel, there'll still be some flour. So they had different kinds of almost like rulers, and it was called a macha godesh. You take the ruler and you put it against the top of the vessel so it flattens it. Any extra comes off the vessel because that's not part of the kilo. And now you have a perfectly filled vessel against the top lip of the vessel, and that's a sa'ah. So they had this thin ruler that would go across the top of the vessel and flatten it out so that you know it was a sa'ah. So that's the thickness. We're being told that the Shnei Gizrei Eitz and each one of these boards was an amma wide and amma long, and its thickness was the thickness of this ruler that was used to flatten out the top of a sa'ah. Those are the two marachos. Now, the reason why they kindled, the winner number one kindled the fire and then put the two pieces of wood on top, instead of putting the two pieces of wood on top and then kindling the fire, Yerushalmi tells us simple. Shnei Gezirei Eitzim is a separate mitzvah. So if the Kohen would set up the logs and then put the two Gezirei Eitzim on top of the logs and then kindle the logs, it would all be one big fire. You wouldn't be doing a separate mitzvah of the Shnei Gezirei Eitzim. So what they did was they set up the logs, put the fats and the limbs from yesterday on the logs, kindled the logs, and now there's already a fire. Now by putting the two additional logs on it, it became a separate mitzvah instead of the logs and the two boards all on it at the same time and creating one big fire at the same time, which you're not supposed to do. It's supposed to be two separate mitzvahs. They kindled the logs, put the limbs and fats from yesterday on it, and then the Kohen, when the lottery won, would put the two separate boards on it as it is a separate mitzvah. Halacha Yud, Ma'arocha Shlishis, HaMa'arocha HaShlishis Shel Kima Eish, the third Ma'arocha, the third set of logs, which we call Kima Eish. If you go to page 75, you can see that. That's on the northern side of the Mizbeach, behind the Tapuach. It could be put anywhere on the Mizbeach. This is true for all the marachos. The marachos, the logs have to be brought on the Mizbeach and then lit, kindled on the Mizbeach. You couldn't kindle them below the Mizbeach and then bring burning logs on top of the Mizbeach. The kindling had to occur on the Mizbeach. Page 80, Dine Sidur Gizre, Dine Sidur Marachas, the laws of how you set up the logs. Yiralim, Zaman Sidur Marachas, Unasinas HaGezir B'Mizbeach U'Balayla. This is the sheet that we learned about. This is all happening during the nighttime. Our lottery winner number one, that lottery was done in the Beis Hamoket, according to the Rambam and the Lishkas Hagozis. That was done before dawn. The Trumas Hadeshim was done before dawn. The Bilush HaZorah, the Kohanim that checked the Azorah to make sure all the Kalim in place before dawn. the bringing of the cleaning off of the top of the Mizbeach with the pitchforks and the shovels into the Tapuach before dawn. Bringing the logs to the Mizbeach so that the winner lottery one can set up the marachos before dawn. Putting the limbs and the fats of yesterday's korban back on the maracha before dawn. Lighting the maracha gedol and lighting the maracha of ketores before dawn. And the Kohen putting the two gizrei eitzim, winner lottery one, putting the two boards on the ignited, the lit fire before dawn. So there's a lot of things happening before dawn. Zaman siddur hamarachos u'mesinas hagzon b'mizbeach hu balayla. These things happened at night. Yud Beis a masadin es atzeh hamarocha elarak lifnei hakovas tamid shel shachar. The only time logs had to be set up were in the morning before the korban tamid shel shachar. Remember, there's going to be a standard korban tamid in the afternoon. Did they clean the mizbeach in the afternoon from the morning logs and set up new logs for the afternoon? Moshe, say no, and that's the halacha that the Hashavas Havoda brings down. Setting up logs was only done in the morning, and those logs were used for the korban tamid in the morning and the korban tamid in the afternoon. The setting up of logs was only done before the korban tamid shel shachar. Before the korban tamid in the afternoon, you did not have to set up new logs. They used the same wood that they used in the morning for the korban tamid shel bein habayim. Here we have a little difference between the morning and the afternoon. Halacha Yud Gimel. Ashnei hagzirim shehayu ma'alim lemizbeach la'akrovas hatamid shel bein habayim hayu ma'alim shnei kohanim kol echad hayamala eitz echad biyado. This is learned out of a pasuk. We learned this in the Mishnah when we were doing the Mishnayos and Tamid. The winner of lottery one, he threw the two additional boards on the Mizbeach after it was lit, on the Maracha Gedola. He threw both of them. That was his mitzvah. The winner of lottery one did the Trumas Hadeshin, set up the logs on the Maracha Gedola, set up the logs on the Maracha Ketana, ignited the Maracha Gedola Maracha Ketana, and put the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim on the lit Maracha. That's in the morning. In the afternoon, remember there's no lotteries in the afternoon. Whoever won the lottery in the morning to do a specific avoda, he did that same avoda in the afternoon. So if you won the avoda in the morning to shech the korban tamid of the morning, you won that avoda in the afternoon. So Kohen Shmuel, who shechted the korban tamid shel shachar, he would shech the korban tamid shel bein habayim. Yisachar, Kohen Yisachar, who sprinkled the blood of the korban tamid shel shachar, Yisachar, Kohen Yisachar would sprinkle the blood of the korban tamid shel bein habayim. Winner lottery in the morning did the same thing in the afternoon. Our Kohen winner lottery one, he did the Trumas Hadeshin before dawn. There is no Trumas Hadeshin in the afternoon. And there also is no setting up logs in the afternoon. Whatever logs were set up in the morning were used in the afternoon as well. So our winner of lottery number one, what did he do in the afternoon? There's no Trumas Hadeshin in the afternoon. He doesn't take off a shovel of ash in the afternoon. It's only before dawn, so he doesn't do that. He doesn't set up the Maracha Gedola or the Maracha Shel Ketoros because you don't set up logs in the afternoon. He didn't kindle a fire because you don't have to kindle a fire in the afternoon. The only thing what was left to do in the afternoon is the Shnei Gezirei Eitzim. The same way in the morning, two boards were put onto the Maracha Gedola after the light was kindled. In the afternoon, before the korban tamid shel bein habayim, two boards were put on the Maracha Gedola. There's a little difference though. Our winner of lottery one in the morning did these things that I just enumerated, and he threw both boards on top of the Maracha Gedola. In the afternoon, our winner of Lottery 1 had nothing to do except he threw one of the two boards in the afternoon on the Maracha Gedola, and a second Kohen, who he usually picked, would throw the second board on the Maracha Gedola in the afternoon. So in the morning, one Kohen, the winner of Lottery 1, would put both boards on the Maracha Gedola. In the afternoon, we learn out of a pasuk that those two boards are to be put on the Maracha for the Korban Tamid Shel Ben Abayim by two separate Kohanim. Those two Kohanim in the afternoon were our winner one from the morning, and a second Kohen who he picked to throw the second board for the Korban Tamid Shel Ben Abayim. You can take a look at picture 63. They're showing you at the time in the afternoon of the Korban Tamid Shel Ben Abayim. There are two Kohanim that are now throwing the boards on the Maracha because that's how it was done in the afternoon. In the morning, it was just one Kohen, the winner of Lottery 1, who threw both boards onto the Maracha Gedola. Now we're up to B'li Neder. We'll continue tomorrow, page 81, with Pius Hasheni. And we're almost at the point where we're finished with V'hashem Es Havoda phase 1. We'll go back to Maseches Tamid Perek Daled Mishnah Beis. We're going to go through the second set of Avoda, and then we're going to come back V'hashem Es Havoda to put into order and to put it into the halacha.